Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a look at photosynthesis. So a quick introduction, kind of a review or a refresher, we can say, of the things that you already have learned about photosynthesis in the past and some important points as well as we continue on to some other topics and really going in depth with photosynthesis. So here is photosynthesis, very simple. And it seems really easy, but we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of it, and we'll be taking a closer look at exactly how everything happens during photosynthesis. Now, the word itself, when we look at photosynthesis, okay, it's going to tell us a lot, and it's going to help us remember a lot about what's going on with photosynthesis. So the first part, photo, and the second part, synthesis. Okay, so photo means light, synthesis means to make. So in photosynthesis, we're using light to make something. So it's going to help us understand photosynthesis in that way. Another thing that we can use by looking just at the word photosynthesis alone is to help us remember that there's actually two main stages to photosynthesis. So there's going to be a stage that involves light and then a stage that involves making something. So the word itself can give us a lot of information about what's going to actually happen with photosynthesis. Alright, so stuff that you already know, some big ideas that you should already know about photosynthesis, things that pop into your head when you even think about photosynthesis. So first, photosynthesis is the process that plants use to make their food. So that's like early, you learn that in elementary, you learn that in middle school, you learn that in 9th grade. So photosynthesis is all about trapping the sun's energy and making their food, in this case carbohydrates or glucose. That's usually what we focus on. Second thing, if you went a little bit more complex, especially in 9th grade, you learned that photosynthesis is going to take in light energy and convert it to chemical energy. So something that living things can actually use to get energy out of. So it's about converting energy from one form to another into chemical energy. And that chemical energy is going to be in the form of organic molecules. And we're going to focus on glucose as the main type of energy. So we see in photosynthesis that the plants or the producers or autotrophs, if you remember those terms as well, are going to trap energy from the sun in the form of glucose. And in order to do that, you're going to look at carbon dioxide and water being broken apart and rearranged. So that's what the main idea of what's going on with photosynthesis is, to make that glucose by breaking apart carbon dioxide and water and trapping the sun's energy in chemical energy instead. All right, taking a look at where photosynthesis happens. So if you were to take a look at a leaf and you were to zoom in, you'd see all the different cells here. So what you're looking at, this is one cell. Here's another cell here, and there's another cell there. So each one of these that you see here is a cell, and then these little green structures inside of each cell, those are the chloroplasts. So all the green parts of a plant, wherever you see green, that's where you're finding your chloroplasts. And chloroplast is the main site where photosynthesis is going to happen. So it's a organelle within the cell that is specifically organized to have everything together that is necessary for photosynthesis. Now, before we go any further, I'd like you to grab a blank sheet of computer paper. You're going to fold it in half, and on the outside flap, so if you look at it like this, the outside flap, you're going to draw this picture here. Okay, so just that picture right there is what you're going to draw. So this whole thing there, you're going to draw on this outside flap. So as usual with anything that you draw on here, make sure you put effort into it, make it look good, something that you can be proud of, something that you can refer back to later when you're studying. So go ahead, pause the video, and draw that there. Draw the chloroplast there. All right. Let's go ahead and label your picture now. So now that you have your chloroplast drawn, we're going to go ahead and label it. So just like the mitochondria, this is going to seem very familiar to you. We have an outer membrane. So our chloroplast has two membranes, just like the mitochondria does. So we have an outer membrane. There's an inner membrane. So that's what we see here. When you're looking at this picture, that's another thing to put this into perspective. A chunk of the mitochondria has been cut out. So mitochondria just don't have this piece missing, so you can see the inside. A piece of it has actually been cut out, so we can see the inside of the mitochondria here. So we have an outer membrane, we have an inner membrane, and then you have an intermembrane space, the space between those two membranes there. So the space in between, all the way around the entire thing, would be the intermembrane space. Now the parts you really need to know, because this is where photosynthesis is going to go down. Thylakoid. So here, each of these little circles that you see here, I've had students refer to them as like, they kind of look like Mentos stacked on top of each other. Each one of these is a thylakoid. So there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. Those are thylakoids, very important, especially for the first part of photosynthesis. If you have a stack of thylakoids, we call it a granum. So a stack of thylakoids is a granum. So there's a granum there, here's another granum here, there's another granum there, and there, and there. The third part that you really need to know is going to be the stroma. So the stroma is the fluid-filled space inside here. So here's your inner membrane, and all of this stuff is inside that inner membrane there. It's filled with fluid. So all the space in between all these thylakoids, in between all these granum here, that's called the stroma, and that's where the second stage of photosynthesis is going to happen. So I'd say the two main parts that you really need to know will be the thylakoid and the stroma. Okay. All right. When you look at a chloroplast, so I'm going to go back real quick. When you look at a chloroplast, they're the color green. Why are they green? It comes down to a pigment called chlorophyll, and you've definitely heard that one before. So the pigment called chlorophyll is the reason why we see our chloroplasts green. Chlorophyll is actually going to be found inside the thylakoid membranes here, and that's where you will find your chlorophyll. But why green? So what makes it green? Why do we see the color green? So I'm going to explain colors really quickly to you. So one thing to remember is that light travels in waves. So here we see a picture of the sun. The visible spectrum from here to, from here to here, those are the rays from the sun that we can actually see. Everything outside of that, the human eye can't see, but they're there. They're all around us. So cosmic rays, gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays, infrared, microwaves, shortwaves, long waves, they're all there. Our eyes just can't pick it up. Our eyes can only see this part of the spectrum. We call that the visible spectrum. Okay. So light travels in waves as well. So within the visible spectrum here, we see different wavelengths. Wavelengths are going from like the top of one wave to the other, or the trough, the bottom part of one wave to another. We can measure the wavelengths. And you can see when you look at the visible spectrum, if you remember Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, you look at those colors and you'll notice that when you go from red to violet, the waves get closer and closer and closer together. And that's going to affect what colors can be absorbed and what colors can be reflected by a pigment, especially a pigment like chlorophyll, for example. So the way colors work, and I remember when I first learned this, I was like, whoa, that's really how it works. Let's say you see something that is red. Right? What's happening is all the colors of the rainbow are actually hitting that object that's red. It's absorbing all colors except for red. Red is actually being reflected, it's bouncing off, and it's hitting your eye. That's why you see the object as the color red. Let's say you see something as blue. In that case, that object is absorbing all the colors except for blue. It's reflecting blue back, and it's hitting your eyes. So when you see an object, it's really every color except the color you're actually seeing. It's actually reflecting that color back to your eyes, and that's why you're seeing that specific color. Now, if something's black, that means it's absorbing all the colors and nothing's being reflected back to your eyes. If something is white, it's all the colors of the rainbow are hitting it, and every single color is being reflected back to your eyes. So the light from the sun is really all colors of the rainbow. Whenever the human eye sees all colors of the rainbow at once, we perceive it as the color white. So that's why we see things as white. So if an object is white, like the paper here, all colors from the light around in this room are hitting it. All colors are bouncing back, as a result of different pigments and stuff that make up this paper, and as a result of that we see white. So all the colors are reflecting back, and I perceive the color white for this case. Okay. All right. Next, reactants. So what is needed for photosynthesis to happen? So we're going to talk about the equation now. So for photosynthesis to occur, the two things that you really need are going to be carbon dioxide and water. So carbon dioxide and water are our two main reactants here. Light isn't a reactant. It's part of the energy that's going to be absorbed and converted, but it's not a reactant in this case. So reactants are the molecules that are going to get torn apart and rearranged. So it's our carbon dioxide and water that are reactants. The products that are made at the end of photosynthesis are going to be glucose and oxygen. Now notice here I put glucose in parentheses. We were all taught glucose in middle school, 9th grade, that glucose is what's made. But in reality, what we're going to learn now as we go into more depth with photosynthesis is that a 3-carbon sugar is made, not glucose. So by the end of photosynthesis, we make a 3-carbon sugar. That 3-carbon sugar is then used to make glucose and other organic molecules, but we actually don't make glucose directly itself as a result of photosynthesis. But that's usually what we learn. Okay, so we actually make a 3-carbon sugar instead. All right. Which product is the goal of photosynthesis? So we said we made glucose, we made oxygen. A lot of people want to focus on the oxygen because we know we need oxygen, we can't survive, especially from what we learned in cellular respiration. In cellular respiration, we learned that if the oxygen isn't there at the end of the electron transport chain in cellular respiration, then we don't go any further. So we need that oxygen there in order for that to occur and make lots and lots of ATP. So people want to focus on that as being the goal. But in photosynthesis, it's actually the glucose that's the goal. So glucose is the goal. That's what we really want to make in photosynthesis. That makes oxygen a waste product. So technically it's a waste product. You might be thinking, oh, a waste product? How can it be a waste product? It's so important. But that's what it is in this case, because the whole reason that photosynthesis even happens is to make the glucose. All right, the equations. So first we have word form. So carbon dioxide plus water. Arrow is going to get us glucose and oxygen. Now over the arrow, we're going to write light, because that's the energy that's going to be involved here. You can write it where you can have carbon dioxide plus water plus light on one side. Sometimes it's written that way as well. I like to write it with light over the arrow there. All right, the balanced chemical equation. So carbon dioxide is written as CO2. Water is written as H2O. Arrow with light over it, our energy that's going to be trapped and converted. Glucose, remember CHO, 6, 12, 6, plus oxygen. Now this isn't a balanced equation, so we got to balance it out. So remember our magic number is 6, so this should look very familiar to you. This should look like cellular respiration, but reversed. Okay, so we put 6 CO2, 6 H2O. These are going to get torn apart or rearranged into glucose and 6 oxygen molecules. So that is our balanced chemical equation for our photosynthesis. All right. Now, here's what we're going to be going into detail on. So we see the equation and it looks really simple, but within the process of what's going on with photosynthesis, there's 2 main stages. So there is a light-dependent reactions stage, and then there's the Calvin cycle stage. So this is the photo part of photosynthesis, and this is the synthesis part of photosynthesis. Okay. One thing to keep in mind as we do this is this must happen. So this first stage must happen before the second stage can happen. If this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. Okay. So they're very closely, deeply rooted, connected to each other. All right. That's it for photosynthesis, and in class we'll go into more detail.